Commonly, this can be a phase 2, but I definitely have customers that know that guest access is the #1 reason they're using Teams today and need to roll it out right away. Decision 7, do you require network planning? We went over the prepare your network, but there's other tools that we can look at. Decision 8, probably the longest one right there. Do you require security and compliance policies? And we'll go through those. Decision 9, is the timeline established? That's really critical in rolling out a rapid deployment. And then decision 10, is training and communication planned? All right, so we're going to go and milk these as much as we can in the amount of time we have. Number 1, who can create teams? There are 3 primary models. There is open, that's users can create their own groups as needed without needing to wait or bother IT. That's very common. There's IT-led. Users request a group from IT. IT can then guide them in selecting the best tools for their needs. And then there's controlled, and that's where the group creation is restricted to specific people, teams, or services. So really some decision points to consider here is which provisioning model fits your organization requirements. Do you allow SharePoint Online team site creations by default? Then maybe use that same similar model. Does your organization require limiting group creation to administrators? Or do you have a request form that you've always been using and that's the way your organization works? Now you have to figure out how to put teams into that request process. Does your organization require limiting the group creation to just security? Or does your organization require some groups to be created dynamically based on user attributes such as department? I'd like to say, let's empower users with self-service. I think we strongly consider self-service to be very empowering for employees when they want to get their work done. So everyone can create groups and admins can really manage Teams lifecycle through expiration policies. And if you need to limit it to a subset of users, you can certainly do that. You document and communicate how you are going to have a request process. Figure out maybe you want a Power App. You want that in Teams on your channel or on your side rail. And that's where everybody requests it. But what you could do is you can maybe automate the approval and just collect information, right? Have a secondary owner, make that a requirement before you get a new Microsoft team. You can also collect more information. So there's other metadata, especially if you require a business decision or a business reason. If you do that in SharePoint today, you can do that with Teams. And then consider using dynamic membership to configure security group members to control group creation. That's also another possibility. I would use that in the case of if you have a strong training sessions within Teams, you could have a Teams owner training session, and if they go through that and they pass their training, then they can get added to the security group to be able to create their teams. So there's different ways you can do it, and assessing which really scenario fits for you will help along your journey. And I think, like I said, bringing your governance team into these decisions are really critical, because you can't necessarily make those decisions in a vacuum without knowing maybe all the other things to consider. All right, that was decision 1. Hopefully we're ready. Decision 2, are admins defined? In the prepping for M365 and getting a new tenant set up, you created an M365 service model. And in that model, you have already assigned roles, you've defined roles, and this is one more step. This is where you have 4 team admin roles available. And using Azure Active Directory, you can designate admins who need different levels of access for managing Microsoft Teams. Administrators can manage the entire workload, or they can have delegated permissions for troubleshooting, call quality problems, or even managing your organization's telephony needs. So if you haven't looked at them, I think the majority probably just have team service admin, but if you do need granular, they are there. So make sure that you right size your privilege roles. All right, decision 3. Have you reviewed the settings and policies? Let's talk about controls for a second. We have two broad categories, settings and policies. Settings allows always apply to everyone in the organization. So again, let me clarify that. The settings apply to everyone in the org. Policies, they can apply across your whole organization. So every type of policy, such as your messaging policy, will have a default for every user. You can also set granular policies and target specific people or groups of workers using your user personas. And we will talk about that. Here's some common team settings and policies. I'm not going to drain this slide too much, but just wanted to show you that you have org-wide settings, and that's really for your general team, external access, guest access, and then you get more granular. You have team policies that can define your organization, what you can do in the team and channel. Messaging is selecting which chat and channel messaging features are available, like Giphy, memes. Meetings, you can manage who can hit record, who can't. So meeting settings, meeting policies, and apps. I'm gonna drain apps on a different slide, but apps are really critical because remember when I talked about pillars, really apps is that third pillar. It's the integration to what you already use today. Not just our first party apps at Microsoft, also your organization apps, but then these other business line apps. So each user has 13 policies assigned to them, and that's current. That's of May 27, 2020. And they apply to every user, and they are designed for org-wide default. I like to say we have created them to match 85 to 90% of businesses, which is why it's important that you review them with your governance board or M365 stakeholders, along with your service owner. And this is really to ensure your configurations match your business requirements. And here are all the policies. So quite a bit to review, but worth it. And when I think of these decisions that we're talking about today, you're going to want everyone in the room, and you may have meetings over meetings and a cadence that will be able to have review sessions on policies. All right, decision 4, are user personas required? And before your governance team reviews all the app settings, you may want to determine who in your organization can have broader or more limited access. And I call this a curated experience. And to create it, you may want to evaluate the user personas in your company. And if you haven't done it, that's okay. This can certainly still be a phase 2. But if you need it out of the gate and you need to curate that experience, you need to probably come up with who are those user buckets inside of your company, individuals like the deployment team. Maybe they should have access to everything, but they probably won't be like information workers. Or first line workers may need use the shifts application for time and shift management, but information worker may be using things like Power BI and Trello, maybe even GitHub or ServiceNow. And it's important to realize that this is a unique experience that you can roll out a tool that's actually connected to how you use or how they work today. And then of course, you could have a very limited view, which is simply chat and intranet. Decision 5, now that we have all the apps and the settings reviewed, we also need to focus a little bit more on these third-party apps. We know that not all apps are for all organizations, of course, which is why you can also establish permission policies to permit these certain user personas to find and install only the apps that you want them to use. The best use of Teams really includes all the integration to those apps. You can allow all apps, block all apps, or set granular policies on an app-by-app basis. And at a minimum, your technical team should enable first-party and feature apps, and depending on your use case, you may opt to include additional ones. I certainly know a lot of my customers today that have organizational apps. They have a SharePoint intranet, and they have a wrapper around it, and they pin that to their side rail, and that's an organizational app. You can also, in Power Apps, add them to Teams. They could also be an organizational app. So today there are hundreds of applications you can use within Teams. I'm pretty sure it's more than 300. I think it's up to 500. It just seems to grow. Every time I blink, there's another one. So, but it really is about how making Teams be more efficient for the way you work. But really the best practices to manage apps is to make sure that you have some sort of process in place for when you are ready to roll out apps. Because let me tell you, people will find them. And if they don't find them because you hid them, they're going to hear about them from someone else, or they're going to say, I wish we had that, or they may even ask for it. So reviewing applications with your governance board is pretty critical. You're going to want to go in there, identify the purpose and business value of the applications. I like to say categorize them because you may have some you already own. So if you already have the license, why not simply connect it? Then you've got ones that you might want to be trialing, and then some that have no business demand at all. Those you can just kind of set aside. Next, I would say determine that vendor relationship, because as the Microsoft 365 service owner, they may not want to manage things like ServiceNow. It's not in their list of products that they are SMEs on, nor should it maybe fit with them. Where it should fit is with that other service or product owner. So determining that internal support or product owner will be key. The next is about creating application processes. I have lived through this, so I'll tell you that you will get people who want to use something, and it might be better to be more planful by developing an application request process for the business, and then defining what the application approval process is, like who should it go to before we bring it into our tenant, and then developing the testing process for IT or that user persona deployment team, and then determining a schedule to add apps to policies after approval. So that was a mouthful, but managing apps is really important. The fantastic news is we do have a manage apps section, and that's going to help you see all of the different applications. Decision 6, do you want to enable guest access? I think when I work with customers, guest access tends to be included in the second phase of their rollout. But like I mentioned earlier, customers have a tendency to want to roll out Teams because of guest access. And it is important to understand the difference, to me, of external versus guest access, so you know exactly what it is you're getting into. Let's review. External access, also called federation, is for calling, chat, and meetings for external users. Okay, just to be clear, external access is for the call, chat, and meetings. But what if you want guests in Teams? This also includes the chat, call, and meeting features plus collaboration. So the difference and the distinction here I really wanted to drive home is that when you have somebody come in for a federated user or external access user, they do not get access to Teams whatsoever. They can call and they can chat and you can have a meeting with them. However, they're not going to be in SharePoint. They're not going to be in OneDrive. They're not going to be co-authoring with you on documents. So that's a clear distinction. I'm not going to drain this slide, but I wanted you to have this as a reference. This is really about what features are you looking for when you're thinking, oh, I want to connect with that other vendor. So we're going to allow that whole domain name, and we expect these things to happen. So, educate yourself on the difference between the two. Know what you want to use when you deploy. You may want to start with external and then move to guest and pilot that. That might be a nice path to go down. All right, here, let's talk about to satisfy all your organization requirements, though, let's figure out how do we enable guest access. There's 4 different levels of authorization, and all the authorization levels apply to your Office 365 tenant. Each level controls the guest experience. So Azure Active Directory is where your guests are located. So guest access in Teams really relies on Azure AD B2B platform. And this authorization level controls the guest experience at the directory, tenant, and application level. Next, we need to go into Teams, and when I showed you the Teams policies, it's in the section for org-wide policies, and that is where you enable Teams. So guest users have access to resources in Teams for the file, team, and collaboration. Next, in the Teams have admin controls, and in those controls, they can control everything by how much they collaborate with you and how permissive it is within SharePoint and in OneDrive. Again, this is another section here is that the guest access enablement checklist is going to give you all the locations to set up guests. So not draining it too much because there's fantastic articles out on docs.microsoft.com, but this is where you turn on guest access, right? In the Team Admin Center, in Azure Active Directory, in M365 Admin Center, in a couple places, SharePoint and OneDrive, and then in the individual team level. I would almost argue and say probably one more place, which is the Security and Compliance Center. If I'm going to have guests inside of my tenant, I want to enable MFA. I don't want them coming in without MFA. So you can do that over there, as well as setting other conditional access policies. But here's the best practice for guest access. Really, user permissions, admins can create the policy where only users with the guest inviter role can invite guests. So now you've really limited down. You're not wide open. You limited down to someone who knows, understands, and is trained and can go ahead and send the invite out. You could also do domain restriction. That's where you allow or deny a list of partner domains. And then group level, all the way down to the group to say guest access can be enabled or disabled at that group. So depending on how granular you need, I would say guest access is one of those things that you might want to take a little bit more time on to really figure out what's going to work for you. All right, decision 7. Now we've already done our onboarding checklist, so we prepared our network, but here's some additional things that you can do. So we provided really a bunch of different things to make sure that you are set up, but what is new here is called Network Planner. This calculates your network requirements for deploying Teams and Cloud Voice across your organization's physical locations. It is in the Admin Center. If you have not checked it out, you can go ahead and do so. You can add personas, if you will, and those would be different locations that are set up. You can test those connectivities out into those locations to see what that performance experience would be like. So if your organization is already fully onboarded, then you probably already have a really great network plan. However, I would rethink and just look at this one more time to make sure all the requirements are in place. Decision 8, do you require security and compliance policies? This is probably the longest topic of this whole thing, and it's critical because you don't want to just turn it on and have everybody come on in. You need to start thinking about how does expiration policy connect back to maybe group lifecycle management. Do we need group naming policies? Did we have them for SharePoint? Blocked words, is there a blocked word list? Is there a list of words that you just don't want groups to be called? Retention, this is again, I can't stress enough, bringing in your M365 governance board, because that also includes legal, right? They will come in and they'll say, well, we have a retention policy for our Exchange email. That's 1 year. We want to do the same. And this is where you start talking to them about educating the difference between a chat-based workspace and an instant message chat, and why holding on to the chat or channel conversation in context to maybe a project, you may actually want to retain that for the life of that project. So there's some conversations to have. Archiving and restoring You can certainly archive a team when it's no longer active, and then applying sensitivity labels. I'm going to drain these a little bit more, but really with the increase in usage of Office 365 groups, I think the concern admins have had is, oh, it's SharePoint, and now we're going to have orphaned SharePoint sites, and we're going to have no owners, and we're not going to know what to do. Expiration Policy solves that for you. You can put in place the lifetime or the length of time in days, how long you want that group to stay alive. Now, that doesn't mean when the time is up, it's dead. What it means is that you will get emailed 30 days before, 15 days before, the day before, if you are the team owner, to say, would you like to renew it? So you can set this for all your groups, for selected groups or none, but I'd strongly recommend testing this out. That way you don't have to worry about group sprawl. Group naming policies, I talked about this a little bit. You can have a prefix or a suffix. I'm kind of probably more convinced that naming policies may not make as much of a difference as they used to. That's because we have strong, robust search. I also worry in Teams, the left-hand column, that width, if you start adding a prefix that's a couple words, well, now you don't know what the rest of it says. So it doesn't do a great job of wrapping. I don't know, I think you would just consider it, if you do it for SharePoint, maybe reevaluate, is it necessary? And then blocked words, making sure that if you do have things like the name of the CEO, the CIO, you may not want them as a team name. You can download a CSV file, put a bunch of stuff in there that you want to block, and then re-upload. The next is retention policy. Teams conversations, they are persistent and they are retained forever by default. With the introduction of retention policies, admins can configure policies, both preservation and deletion, in the Security Compliance Center for the Teams chat and channel messages. And you can create a policy for just Teams chat, and then a second policy for Teams channel posts. Next one is DLP. We've had it forever. Now we've added it for Teams, so you can protect all your sensitive information in messages in files by creating and applying policies for Teams chat and channel messages. So if you already have them, just simply flip the switch and hit save. Archive and restore. I think this is really interesting. It's a lot like what you would do in SharePoint when you sunsetted a site. You wanted it to be read-only. You can do that in the Teams Admin Center. You can go ahead and archive a team when it's no longer active, but you want to keep it around for reference, or you can even reactivate it in the future. So really interesting. I would check out reading more about archiving. Next one is sensitivity labels. You can create sensitivity labels from the Microsoft Information Protection Framework, letting you classify and protect your organization's data. So this is different than classification labels. We are now using unified sensitivity labels. And once you create them, now you can apply policies against them and say, all of my Office 365 groups that have a sensitivity label of highly confidential, block all guest users from accessing. So now there's guarantee no one who is a guest outside of your company can get to that data and get to those teams. All right, decision 9, is the timeline established? A successful Teams implementation proceeds at a healthy pace to ensure the appropriate momentum, focus, and learnings. But what I have experienced is that extending experimentation for too lengthy a time increases the risk of a failed change program. Going back to our M365 stakeholders and our governance board, who is the program manager that is connected to the project of your rapid deployment? Do they know about Advisor for Teams to help you plan your Teams deployment in your organization? We have released Advisor for Teams, which is a new onboarding tool in the Teams Admin Center that brings your project team together to help you plan the best possible Teams deployment in your organization. Advisor for Teams gives you a collaboration space in a form of a team, of course, and recommended plans. So basically step-by-step guidance that walk you through the deployment of your team's workloads. Whether it's going to be first messaging or meetings, Advisor for Teams creates a deployment team inside of Teams, invite all of your stakeholders to it, and then you get a planner plan. And within these planner plans, it's pretty fantastic, but they include everything from the onboarding to the whole entire implementation rollout, monitoring, and adoption framework. So you really do get a planner plan that really is exhaustive that will help you in your rapid deployment. If you have not seen it, I would definitely recommend doing it because each of those rollout tasks contains all the guidance, all the resources you need to successfully complete the task and implement teams. Last decision is training and communication planned. You know, this becomes about your adoption framework and maybe not just what you want to do, you know, with your organization to say, Teams is here. This is really, I think, a little more thoughtful because it is a shift in the way we work. You know, Skype had its place for chatting, for calling. However, now we're introducing SharePoint. So you have people who lived in Skype who maybe weren't familiar with SharePoint. Now they're coming in. And people who lived in SharePoint who maybe didn't use Skype that much. So it's a combination. And because of that, you really need to develop your awareness and training materials to make sure that you have the right amount of training. People understand what it is, what's the purpose, and at the same time, sunset the other tools. Because nothing's more confusing than which tool can I use or should I use. So having internal awareness materials such as posters, digital signage, and then self-help and training information. I recommend using M365 Learning Pathways. That's an app that you can connect into SharePoint. It provides you the most on-demand learning solution. Don't reinvent the wheel. That's what I always say. There's no reason that you need to reinvent when we've already done it for you. And then if you need updated, you can go ahead and update that app, bring in the most current training documents that we have. Along with that, the Teams Adoption Hub. This is fantastic. I couldn't help, but I had to add it because this gives you the quick start. It also helps you empowering champions and does some introduction material for teams and channels, gives you some posters and planning for your first team rollout and architecture. So to me, this gives you a really great adoption framework, but you couldn't have adoption without, hey, are we measuring? I hope we're measuring, right? So example success measures. Is the company achieving the target benefits? Is the business processes being performed as intended? Are users even happy? Are they using it? Right, using the M365 usage analytics, are they using it? And then have we enabled and motivated them, right? This is change. This is change management for sure. All right, let's go ahead and recapture what we learned. We learned 4 key onboarding checklists on how to prepare Microsoft 365 for Teams, configuring Teams core capabilities, preparing your network along with configuring cloud voice workloads. We also focused on foundational understanding of Microsoft Teams architecture, where you can manage teams, the team tools, and what reports are available to assist you in your adoption efforts. We review the top 10 decisions for your team's rapid deployment from technical readiness, security, compliance governance, organization readiness, solution governance, change management, and adoption, communication, training efforts that will really make your deployment a success. Thank you for joining us on Microsoft Teams Top 10 Decisions for Rapid Deployment. I've had a blast. I hope you have learned a lot. Please provide speaker feedback, take your camera out, take a picture of the QR code, and then let us know if you have any questions. I'll go ahead and keep this slide up. Thank you so much. Okay, there is a question. Is there any way we can share a document using link without adding users to the channel? If you are adding a link, chances are that link could be coming from a SharePoint file that they wouldn't have access to. So in this case, you may want to consider probably email at that point. I'll go ahead and publish that out. All right, well, thank you very much, and I appreciate it.